So Sandman's back. Yay, I guess. Yay. So I have kind of an interesting history with Sandman. Sandman is something that I heard about well before I ever actually read it, and it was just one of these things that it was always in like the top five, most influential series ever, one of the best written series ever. And by the time I read it, I already heard so much about it that I didn't think it could possibly live up to the hype. Plus, there's just it's just one of these things that just seemed really weird anyway. So I didn't think I was going to like it, and I only read it kind of out of a sense of obligation. And I actually read it, and I actually really liked it. And I read the entire graphic novel series in pretty quick succession after I read that first volume. And I think DC is kind of doing this thing where they're just simply bringing back all the stuff that people used to really like and used to have a lot of respect for, and they're just bringing it back, just throw it at the wall to try to gin up some kind of interest in comics and graphic novels in general. So I feel like that's why they're doing Doomsday Clock, a sequel, a genuine sequel to Watchmen that incorporates the Watchmen characters into the larger DC universe. It's like, why would they do that? I think it's just to drum up interest in the superhero comic market. I feel like bringing back Sandman, like this sort of like Sandman universe thing, I feel like that's another element of that. So here we look at the credits page to see who did what. It says that the story is by Neil Gaiman, and it's written by Simon Spurrier, Cat Howard, Nalo Hopkinson, and Dan Waters, which, except for Simon Spurrier, I don't know who any of those people are. Whatever. And then we get illustrated by Bill Saverley, who does Wonder Woman occasionally. Tom Fowler, I know the name, I can't tell you what he does. And then Domo Stanton, Max I can't pronounce that. And then Sebastian Fugmara, something like that. So I don't really know when it says story by Neil Gaiman. I don't really know what they mean there. Like, did he carefully plot out every element of these comics and then other people just filled in the dialogue? Or is it the sort of thing that he just gave them an idea and said, I really don't care what you do with it, just give me a credit? I don't know. And this one shot is a launching off point for 4 or 5 different books, all miniseries that these different writers and artists are doing in the future. So that's really what this is. This is essentially just a promo book. And it's not bad, but it's one of those things that they're troubling signs. And I think we can skip to the middle to find out what exactly I'm talking about. So the story here is that Daniel, Dream of the Endless, has gone missing, which I don't even know how that works anymore, because Daniel Hall, who became Dream of the Endless, who became the dude with the white hair and the white, this guy right here, that's Carter Hall's grandson, and I don't know how that works anymore. It's just another example of DC Rebirth continuity not making any sense. The only thing I can think of is that the Endless, the dreaming, all that stuff, that it's largely immune to retcons, so he's the grandson of A. Carter Hall, but not the one that's currently running around in the Hawkman ongoing. I don't know. That's weird. But so we get this one story, and the idea is that so Daniel is missing, and his Raven, Matthew Cable, is running around trying to find him, and that's where we get the introduction to these different stories. Matthew Cable is the former husband of Abigail Cable, or birth name Abigail Arcane, who is the Swamp Thing's girlfriend. He actually died in the Alan Moore written Swamp Thing series, but then he got resurrected in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, because Neil Gaiman took a lot from the Alan Moore Swamp Thing series. So he's running around trying to find Dream, and he goes to New Orleans, Louisiana. Now you'd figure that Matthew Cable would be at least a little nonplussed about coming back to Louisiana, but we don't really get a scene where he's mentions that at all. It just sort of goes over our head. So could be that they just didn't have enough page space to go into that, but still, it's a little bit weird. So the story is that there's these 2 adopted kids and there's these 2 lesbians, and they're kissing each other as black people in the Deep South are wont to do, without any fear of harassment or anything. It's just that's just something that they do in Louisiana, I guess. I don't know. And then that serves as a backdrop to this story about these 2 voodoo entities that are gonna do something. I don't know. I don't know anything about voodoo. I know a fair amount about different religions and mythologies and things like that, but voodoo is not one of them. So I don't. It is kind of interesting to learn that the alligator with a top hat, which is a symbol I've seen in various places, is some kind of voodoo god. That's kind of interesting, but it's not something that I see where they're going. But this is what I see as the trouble sign, because you may think that objecting to LGBT content in Sandman is really pointless, right? Because, I mean, Sandman was doing this back in the 80s, back when it was genuinely groundbreaking and genuinely kind of a risky thing. And, I mean, you're right. It's you know, pro-LGBT stuff is part of its DNA. In the original Sandman stories, there was this ongoing story about basically these two lesbians that were constantly affected by the things that were going on in the dreaming. So it's definitely a point that the original Sandman emphasized quite a bit. So you're sort of right that it's dumb to focus on that. Here's the thing, though, and this is kind of like the X-Men problem, right? They say that X-Men is a metaphor for the civil rights struggle, and it's like the X-Men have been used as a metaphor for the civil rights struggle. But I think that the appeal of the X-Men in general, it's not that specific. It's more like it's people that feel like misfits, people that feel like they don't belong, and everybody has at some point in their life felt like a misfit. Getting involved with some organization that they didn't appreciate them, didn't accept them, didn't like them, getting involved in, you know, maybe it's their family, maybe it's school, maybe it's something, but just a sense of not belonging and trying to find belonging amongst like-minded people. At some point in their life, everybody has felt that, and I think that's the real appeal of the X-Men. They can't, like I said, they have been used as a civil rights metaphor before, but I don't think that's their core appeal. And it's the same way with Sandman. The Sandman has definitely incorporated LGBT stuff into its stories before. It's been an integral part of certain stories. There's no problem there. The problem is that I feel like that a lot of people that like Sandman, and a lot of people that were inspired by it and went on to be comics writers and just artists in general, I think that they latched on to the pro-LGBT stuff disproportionately. Somebody like me, middle-class, white guy, the thing that I liked about Sandman was that it was a story about stories. It was a story that it was a deep dive into different mythological and belief systems. It was a deep dive into history. It was a deep dive about the way that people's dreams affect their ambitions and their livelihoods. And like I said, yes, a part of that was that there was stuff like this, but there was other stuff too that was a lot more appealing, and I'm just not seeing a lot of it in this entire book here. Now, maybe it will be. Maybe I'm just, being wrong, but this is where the left-wing bias, the SJW bias that we talk about, this is where it comes in. You take something that it was already pro-LGBT, and there are actually things that if you tried to do them today in the original Sandman, they would be called problematic. Right? Gaiman was ahead of his time in a lot of things, but he's one of these guys that's constantly on the verge of losing favor with SJWs because of some of the stuff that he says and does. But you can't deny that he's probably done more for them than a lot of other people did. It's not an automatic strike against it, but this is one of those things that I feel like it's just troublesome, And then there's other just, weird stuff. So here we get Timothy Hunter from the Books of Magic, who was very, very possibly the inspiration for Harry Potter. It's one of those things you can't really prove that J.K. Rowling was in the early 90s inspired by Neil Gaiman's Books of Magic series, but it's really, really likely. But he goes to this English boarding school, and he meets Dr. Psychic, which is Dr. Occult's other half, and she's doing something sinister. But Timothy Hunter met Dr. Psychic in the Books of Magic. She was led him through the elf realm. So I don't know why he doesn't recognize her here. That's just weird to me. In the first story, we get this story about Matthew Cable, the Raven, trying to get through to the mundane realm, and he meets this, and it actually took me a while to recognize her. Basically, Dream was given an elf slave at one point, and he can't, free her, and he can't give her back, So he's just kind of stuck with her because of the rules of fairy world. So she's just been, stuck in the dreaming for quite some time at this point. And so Dream doesn't like the idea of having slaves, so he really can't make her do anything. And so she's just sort of left wandering around, meandering to herself. And in the original Sandman, she was really meek. She was really unassertive. She was obviously very troubled. She was obviously in love with at least the original Dream. I don't know about Daniel, but here she's much more sarcastic. She's much more assertive. She's much more she's just generally bitchier. And we find out an element to her that we'd never seen before, which is that she can apparently turn into this monstrous creature who genuinely freaks out the Raven, Matt Cable, who was somebody who thought he'd seen pretty much everything by this point. So we get, once again, a character is completely changed now, and probably to make it less problematic. And it's one of those examples of Neil Gaiman being constantly on the verge of being, like I said, problematic. Also, this character in the middle here, I didn't recognize her at first. Actually, when I saw her, I initially profiled her as a male character and just sort of ignored her. But apparently, this tall, dark, short-haired female here at the toga is supposed to be Eve, Cain and Abel's mother, which Eve was always portrayed as a relatively short, dark-haired, light-skinned woman, not tall and dark-skinned. So I don't know what's going on there. They did suggest that her appearance was variable, but that's another really pretty big change to a character. I don't know how much of this is just caused by continuity changes over the last 20 years, but it's weird. Then we get this thing with Lucifer here. This was probably the best sequence in the entire book. Lucifer is always an interesting character. I never actually read the Lucifer Vertigo series from the 90s that came out of Sandman. But the way that Neil Gaiman wrote him, he wrote him as one of the most interesting characters in the entire series. And here, he still comes off as probably, once again, the best written character. But there's a lot of frustratingly vague things going on that I don't know. But apparently he's trying to get back at God in some way that will actually hurt God. So we'll see how that goes. And then finally we get the main story, the actual, the thrust of it, which is, Matt Cable's searching for Dream. Well, where did Dream go? Well, it turns out that he's just flat out abandoned his post, which in the original Sandman series, Destruction did the same thing. He didn't die, he didn't quit, he just simply abandoned it, which meant that the process of destruction would continue, it just wouldn't continue without his hand in it. So that seems to be what Dream has done here, but you don't get a mention that Destruction also did it. You do see a black panel here, which that may be his younger brother, I'm not 100% sure, but it's a little odd, and I don't know where they're going with that. So, Sandman, it's one of these things that I really don't think you could do it today. Again, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe, especially if other writers writing it, whereas before, it was only Neil Gaiman who would write the main series, and then some other people would write different elements to it. They would write offshoots and things like that, but it's just hard for me to imagine bringing Sandman back in any real way without Gaiman being heavily involved with it, and I don't know where they're going with it, but I don't know, let's just say this one shot. There's elements to it that I like, but it's not getting me excited. It's sort of proving my point that this is just DC trying to gin up interest no matter what they have to do it, and I'm not sure if it's going to work out for them, but I don't know. We'll see. So, tell me if you read this. Tell me what you thought about it. Tell me what you think about the original Sandman. Like, comment, subscribe. In any case, this is Automatic Chevron, signing off.